My mother announced to 150 people my eyeside attempt at my party. Months later I flipped the script and watched her fall apart in front of her friends. You know, there are some moments in life that just break you. Moments so publicly humiliating, so deeply personal, that they strip away every layer of your confidence. But what if that moment, that betrayal, came from the one person who was supposed to protect you? My own mother stood before 150 people at my engagement party and used my darkest, most vulnerable secret as a punchline. Can you imagine? Felt like my entire world shattered right there. But I promise you, I eventually learned how to shatter hers back. And the chilling part, it actually made me wonder if I was becoming just like her. Let me tell you about my mother, Catherine. She always saw herself as the funniest person in any room. Years of open mics at dive bars, never really making it past a 5-minute slot, but in her head, she was a professional comedian. Her whole existence revolved around getting a laugh, no matter the cost, no matter who she humiliated. And more often than not, that who was me. Growing up, every single embarrassing thing I did became fodder for her act. My 8th birthday party. She announced to everyone I still wet the bed. Hilarious, right? My first period when I bled through my pants at school. That became her go-to closing line for months. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to what she did at my engagement party. My fiancé, Ethan, and I had been together for 3 years when we decided to get married. His family was wonderful. Established, kind, and respected. The engagement party was a big deal, held at his parents' country club. Everyone important in Ethan's life was there. His whole family, his father's business associates. And then Catherine arrived. Already half in the bag, wearing a sequined gown like she was accepting an Oscar. She started interrupting every conversation, trying to land jokes that just didn't. People would smile politely, but you could feel the discomfort in the air. Halfway through dinner, she clinked her glass. No one had asked for a speech, but she was going to give one anyway. She started by saying how thrilled she was that I'd found someone willing to marry me. Despite everything. My heart already sank, knowing what was coming. Then she launched into this humorous anecdote about how she never thought this day would happen. And then she did it. She told everyone about my mental breakdown when I was 19. She didn't just mention it, she performed it. She mimicked my sobbing, acted out me pleading with her for help, did an impression of me saying I wanted to die. She described finding me with a medication, rushing me to the hospital, the 48-hour hold. She even made sound effects for the heart monitor. And then, I swear to God, she got down on the floor to demonstrate how I had collapsed. No one was laughing. Ethan's mother had tears in her eyes. His father looked physically ill. My future brother-in-law just walked out. But Catherine kept going. She added, "The funniest part was when I told the psychiatrist I felt worthless, and he said, 'Well, at least you're self-aware.'" She beamed, proud of her own joke, while 150 people sat in absolute, horrified silence. Ethan knew nothing about my past. I'd planned to tell him eventually when the time was right. But not like this. Not as a twisted form of entertainment for his entire family. His grandmother clutched her pearls. His father's business partners exchanged stunned stares. Catherine, finally noticing the silence, added, "Tough crowd," before sitting down, convinced she had killed it. Ethan's family left almost immediately. Half of them haven't spoken to me since. They probably think I'm unstable or that it runs in the family. Ethan almost called off the engagement. It took months of couples therapy to convince him I was okay, that it was a one-time crisis years ago. Catherine. She never apologized. She just said I was overly sensitive, and that humor comes from reality. She even repeated the story at her next open mic, complaining about how wealthy people lack a sense of humor. She thought I should be glad she made me memorable. The wedding was just 2 months away. Catherine was already planning her speech, collecting humiliating stories about Ethan to keep things fair. She even bought a white sequin gown, claiming she needed to stand out in photos. I told her she wasn't giving a speech. She just giggled. "You can't stop the bride's mother from talking," she'd scoffed. That's when it hit me. Catherine needed to feel what it was like. The week before the wedding, I invited all of her comedy buddies to what she thought was my bachelorette party. She was thrilled, saying I was finally developing a sense of humor. She brought 12 people from her open mic nights, all aspiring comedians who thought they were funnier than they were. I announced we'd do a roast, but with a twist. We'd roast our parents for all the insane things they did while raising us. Catherine loved it. "Finally," she'd declared. She went first, naturally, recounting more miserable stories from my childhood. Then others shared genuinely funny anecdotes about their parents. And then, it was my turn. I started. I explained how my mother, at 17, got pregnant with me by her married English teacher, Mr. Parker. How she blackmailed him for money until his wife found out, and he killed himself. How Catherine still had his suicide note, naming her. The room went dead silent. The comics stopped laughing. Kept going. I described how she'd put vodka in my baby bottle to make me sleep so she could party. How she'd bring guys home and have them comment on my development. How she'd told me to be friendlier to them because they were paying our rent. How she'd stolen my college fund, a bequest from my grandmother, to pay for failed comedy lessons. I told them about her being fired from 10 jobs for stealing. Her 4 stints in rehab, which she left because they wouldn't let her perform in group therapy. The time she showed up drunk at my high school, leading to child services calling, and how she told the social worker I was lying for attention. The silence in that room was absolute. Catherine tried to laugh it off, but I didn't stop. I told them about her showing up so drunk at my 7th grade talent show that she fell out of her chair, and how other parents had to carry her out while I pretended not to know her. I told them about finding her passed out in our bathtub with a lit cigarette burning a hole in the shower curtain. And the Christmas when she sold my Nintendo for drug money, telling me Santa wasn't real because we were too poor. Sam, one of the comics, stood up first. Without looking at anyone, he just walked out. Olivia stared at Catherine, mouth agape. People can't stop watching a car crash. Mia, her phone held up, recorded everything. I could see the little red light blinking. The vindication, the hot, brilliant, strong electricity of it, rushed through my chest. But then, something icy crept into my gut. I had just absolutely ruined my mother in front of everyone she knew. Her entire social circle. The look on her face. It felt like I'd kicked a dog. She tried to chuckle, that fake comic laugh she used when a joke bombed, but her voice broke halfway through, coming out like a pathetic cough. Her face was ashen beneath her makeup, and a vein pulsed in her neck. Catherine opened her mouth. "Liar," she whispered, but it sounded so weak, so pathetic, not furious at all. She claimed I was making things up for attention, that I always exaggerated, but her hands shook so violently she had to put down her drink. The other comedians were exchanging glances, silent conversations happening with their eyes, and I knew they were remembering all the stories Catherine had told them about me. David cleared his throat, his voice unnaturally loud in the still room, and suggested we all take a break. People started shuffling towards the exit, an uneasy scraping of chairs and feet. No one spoke. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty. Just me and Catherine, sitting opposite each other at a table littered with empty glasses and wadded-up napkins. She stared at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face. Genuine fear, not her usual bravado. "Why would you do this to me?" she asked, her voice tiny, ancient. I told her. "You brought this on yourself, Mom. You used my suicide attempt as a comedy routine at my engagement party, in front of 150 people." The words felt flat and harsh, and I watched her face crumple like paper. She started to weep, but it wasn't the theatrical wailing she usually put on to get her way. Black streaks of makeup ran down her cheeks, making her look utterly different, worse. She sobbed that I'd wrecked her reputation in the comedy scene, that these were her only friends, that I'd taken away the one thing that made her feel important. I stood up while she was still speaking, grabbing my jacket. She kept calling my name, begging me to stay, to let her explain. But I walked out, leaving her alone. The hallway felt strangely bright and silent, and I could hear her crying through the door. I didn't feel the triumph I expected. Just exhausted, nasty, like I'd eaten something bitter. Ethan called 3 times that night, but I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't explain what I'd done. I sat on my couch, watching my phone light up with his name, my gut tightening with every ring. The next morning, when I finally listened to his messages, his voice was frightened, bewildered. He asked if I was okay. Then he said Catherine had called him, weeping, claiming I'd attacked her in public. My anger flared. Of course, she was already twisting things, making herself the victim, as she always did. She'd undoubtedly told him I was unstable, nasty, that I'd humiliated her for no reason, that she was just trying to be a decent mother. I flung my phone across the room. It hit the wall hard enough to scratch the paint. I met Ethan for coffee that afternoon, arriving early, ordering a drink I didn't touch. He walked in looking utterly drained, dark bags under his eyes. We sat at a corner table, and before Catherine could twist the narrative further, I told him everything. About inviting the comics, setting up the roast, and then every single horrific thing she had ever done. He listened without interrupting, his coffee getting cold, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at me with an unreadable expression. Then he asked, "Do you feel better now that she's gotten her comeuppance?" The question hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. I didn't feel better. I felt sick, still angry, and terrified that I was becoming her. Someone who hurts others and calls it justice. He then told me his parents had asked if we could postpone the wedding. They were worried about family tension. Panic swelled in my chest. I'd spent months planning this day, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, arguing with venues about table placements. I didn't want Catherine to ruin it, to make my wedding day about her dysfunction. Ethan explained that his mother had explicitly said she couldn't face another public spectacle like the engagement party. She was still fielding questions from relatives. His father suggested we wait until things calmed down, and my family situation became more stable. Stable. The word made me want to scream. My family had never been stable, would never be stable. If we waited for that, we would never get married. 2 days later, Catherine showed up at my apartment, unannounced. After looking through the peephole, I almost didn't open the door. She looked utterly shattered, a way I'd never seen her before. Her hair was greasy and pushed back. She wore sweatpants and an old t-shirt, not her usual flashy clothes. I opened the door, and she walked in without asking, collapsing onto my couch. She told me 2 comedy clubs had banned her after word got out about what I'd revealed. The Laugh Factory said they were going in a different direction. The Comedy Store said they were booked for 6 months. A flash of shame hit me, but then I remembered her on the floor at my engagement party, mimicking my fainting, making heart monitor sounds, while Ethan's grandmother clutched her pearls and his business partners exchanged frightened stares. The shame evaporated. Then she said it. The allegation about Mr. Parker. It was true. She had carried the guilt for 27 years. She still had nightmares about his wife calling her a murderer at the funeral. She was 17, dumb, she hadn't understood how blackmail could push someone to suicide. His suicide note, naming her, calling her the ruin of his life and marriage, was still hidden in a box under her bed. I sat there stunned. Catherine never admitted anything, never took responsibility, never showed genuine remorse that wasn't just manipulation. I wasn't sure if this was real honesty or another performance, another attempt to make herself the victim. Ethan's parents invited us both to dinner at their house to clear the air before the wedding. I knew it was a test. Catherine vowed she'd behave, that she understood how important this was, but I didn't believe she could get through one dinner without making everything about herself. Ethan's mother made it clear she wasn't sure she could accept our marriage after everything that had happened. I had no choice but to go, but the entire drive there I felt sick. Catherine met me there, pulling up in her beat-up car, dressed in a plain black outfit that looked like funeral attire. We walked to the house in silence. I could feel her shivering beside me. Dinner was awkward and it only got worse. Ethan's mother was chillingly polite. That way wealthy people are when they despise you but adhere to etiquette. His father barely spoke, passing plates with precise, aggressive gestures. Catherine launched into an apology that started okay but quickly devolved into excuses about her terrible past. Struggling as a single mother, never having any help. Ethan's mother let her speak for about 2 minutes before cutting her off mid-sentence. Many people, she said, her voice like ice, have difficult lives without exploiting their children's pain for attention and amusement. The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine's face went crimson then white. Ethan's father laid down his fork. He asked Catherine directly if she intended to use his son's wedding as fodder, if she was already working on jokes about his family. The question was so blunt, so nasty, that for a split second, I felt defensive of Catherine. Then I realized he was right to ask. Catherine's lips opened and closed, but nothing came out. Her chest rose and fell in fast, shallow movements, as if she couldn't get enough oxygen. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was tiny, broken in a way I'd never heard before. "Yes," she whispered. "I have been a terrible mother. And I knew it even as I was doing it. But I couldn't stop myself. The only time I ever felt important was when I made others laugh." Ethan's father leaned back in his chair. "So, you intend to use this wedding as fodder? Are you making jokes about this dinner right now?" The question sat in the center of the table like a knife. Everyone looked at Catherine, waiting. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Real tears, not her usual histrionic wailing. She vowed she wouldn't give a speech, wouldn't make jokes, said she knew she had done enough damage. Ethan's mother set down her wine glass with a harsh click. "It's not enough," she stated. Catherine needed to understand she was on thin ice. One more incident, and she'd never be welcome back. A strange twist in my chest. I wanted to protect Catherine, even though she deserved every word. The words spilled out before I could stop them. "She's still my mother. And she will be at the wedding." Everyone, including Ethan, stared at me in amazement. His mother raised an eyebrow. His father grimaced. They thought I was making a mistake. But I couldn't take those words back now. Ethan drove me home in silence. Just the hum of the engine, the radio playing something soft I couldn't focus on. We parked in my apartment lot, and he switched off the car but didn't move. He just sat there staring at the steering wheel. He finally asked if I wanted Catherine at the wedding, or if I felt obligated. I opened my mouth, then realized I didn't know. I'd been so focused on being angry, I hadn't considered what I truly wanted. He turned to face me. "It's okay to uninvite her if it makes you feel safer on our wedding day. My family will understand, will support whatever you decide." I told him I needed time to think. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and promised to call me tomorrow. I walked inside and lay on my couch for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner, trying to sort through the anger, to find out what I was really feeling. 2 days passed. I barely left my apartment, ordering food, my phone in hand, staring at Catherine's contact. I thought about all the humiliations, the broken boundaries, how she'd exploited my misery. But then I imagined the wedding day without her. How everyone would wonder, why her absence would overshadow everything. I picked up the phone before I could change my mind. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. I told her she could come, but with strict rules. No speech, no jokes about me or our family, and if she drank too much, my cousin would escort her out, no questions asked. She agreed immediately, no fight, no excuses. The fact that she didn't fight me, that scared me more than if she had. 2 days later, my wedding planner called. I could hear the stress in her voice. Catherine had contacted her directly about microphone access during the reception, asking about the technical setup, the ideal moment to use it. Fury rushed through me, my hands shaking. Catherine had just promised she wouldn't give a speech. I left work early and drove straight to Catherine's apartment, no warning. She opened the door in sweatpants. Hair a mess. I pushed past her into the living room. When I confronted her about calling the planner, she raised her hands. "I just wanted to perform a song for you," she claimed. "It's not a speech, it's a musical homage." I told her I knew she was lying, that she was planning a show to make everyone talk about her again. I stood in her messy living room, comedy notes scattered everywhere, and warned her. If she did anything at the wedding that drew attention to herself, I would never speak to her again. She burst into tears, claiming I was being harsh, that she just wanted to celebrate her only daughter's wedding, that I was treating her like a criminal. I didn't move. I didn't soften my voice. I just stood there and told her that her celebrations had always meant embarrassing me, and I wouldn't let it happen again. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a split second I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the engagement party, how she'd played my suicide attempt for laughs. I left without saying goodbye. I drove to Ethan's apartment and told him everything. He listened, then suggested we hire security for the wedding, specifically to manage Catherine. As ridiculous as it sounded, I knew it was necessary. His parents called while I was there, and after Ethan explained the situation, they volunteered to pay for the security. They didn't trust Catherine after what had transpired. I agreed. I needed to protect my wedding day, even if it meant viewing my own mother as a threat to my happiness. We spent the rest of the evening researching security providers, and I felt both relieved and profoundly sad that this was what my life had come to. 2 days before the wedding, I got a social media message from Sam, one of Catherine's comedy friends who had been at the fake bachelorette party. He wanted to meet, said it was important. I almost ignored it, but something piqued my interest. We met for coffee. He looked uncomfortable, guilty, swirling his cup for a full minute before admitting that Catherine had been calling all her comedy friends, inviting them to the wedding to support her. It seemed she was planning something. He felt awful, he said, for not speaking up sooner. I thanked him and left the coffee shop, my stomach sinking. I knew Catherine would do something, no matter how many boundaries I set. I drove straight to Catherine's apartment again. No call. This time, I didn't even wait for her to invite me in. I just walked past her and confronted her about inviting her comedy friends. She broke down completely. Not the fake crying this time. This was genuine, ugly sobbing that made her whole body quiver. She couldn't stand to be alone at an event where everyone condemned her, she said. She knew she'd ruined our relationship, but she was still my mother, and she was terrified of being cut out of my life. I stood there, watching her fall apart, feeling profoundly uneasy. It was easier to hate her when she was just being horrible. This raw vulnerability made things so much more challenging. She claimed she didn't know how to face Ethan's family alone after everything she'd done, how she couldn't attend without her friends as a buffer. Ethan and I had an emergency therapy appointment the next day. I confessed my fear of becoming Catherine, someone who hurts others and then justifies it. Our therapist helped me understand that this very anxiety, this self-awareness, was what distinguished me from Catherine, who never questioned her actions or their impact. Ethan leaned over and took my hand. He loved me, he trusted me, but he wanted to know I wouldn't use his vulnerabilities the way Catherine had used mine. I promised him I wouldn't, and I meant it. But I also knew I had crossed a line by revealing Catherine's secrets, and I needed to figure out how to be better than that. We ended the session with a plan for the wedding, with boundaries for Catherine, but I was still so worried about what might go wrong. The night before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, a blank piece of paper in front of me. Ethan was at his parents' for a pre-wedding custom, so I had the apartment to myself. I picked up the pen, put it down, picked it up again 3 times before I started writing. The letter came out messy, honest, something I couldn't say face to face. I told her she could attend the wedding with one of her comedy friends, someone who would help ground her, not encourage her act. I wrote that our relationship was shattered, and I wasn't sure if it could be repaired, but I was willing to try if she could respect actual limits this time. I emphasized that I wanted the freedom to grow in my marriage without constantly worrying about being material for her next stand-up set. The last line was the hardest because I had to accept that some part of me still wanted a mother, even if Catherine could never be the one I needed. I sealed the envelope and placed it on the counter, intending to drop it off at her apartment in the morning. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept picturing her face at the fake bachelorette party. Had I gone too far? Or would she finally understand what it felt like to be humiliated in front of loved ones? The morning of the wedding, I was in my bathroom trying to fix my makeup when there was a knock at my door. Ethan wasn't due for another 2 hours. The wedding planner had my schedule down to the minute. Opened the door. Catherine stood there, my letter in her hand. Her eyes were red, but not in her typical dramatic way. She seemed smaller, deflated. She asked if she could come in. I almost said no, but I moved aside and let her into the living room. She sat on my couch, holding the letter, her hands trembling slightly. She'd read it 4 times, she said. She understood. She'd spent her entire life using comedy to avoid dealing with true emotions. Her voice cracked as she said she was going to start real therapy, not the kind where she performed for the doctor or cut sessions short. She didn't expect me to forgive or trust her, but she wanted to try to be better, even if it was too late for us to have a regular mother-daughter relationship. I just stood there, unsure what to say. It was the first time Catherine had apologized without making excuses or turning it into a joke. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said she was proud of me for setting limits, wishing someone had taught her how to do that when she was younger. I told her she had to leave so I could finish getting dressed. She agreed. Before she walked out, she turned. She said she'd be sitting quietly in the 3rd row with Olivia. Olivia had promised to be her support person for the day. The wedding ceremony was held in a garden, a beautiful site chosen by Ethan's parents, with white chairs facing a flower-covered arch. I stood in the bridal suite with my bridesmaids, my stomach doing flips every time I thought of Catherine in the audience. Ethan's mother had barely spoken to me at the rehearsal dinner, and his father kept giving me concerned looks, as if he expected chaos to erupt at any moment. The music began and I walked down the aisle, staring only at Ethan's face, not at the guests. Catherine sat in the 3rd row, exactly where she said she would. She wore a modest blue dress, not the white sequin gown she'd bought months before. Olivia sat next to her, her hand on Catherine's arm. Catherine's face was wet with tears, but she remained completely motionless and quiet. The ceremony was wonderful, in a way I hadn't expected. Ethan spoke his vows, and I spoke mine without interruptions, without performances. During the reception, I watched Catherine approach Ethan's parents at their table. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she spoke without her usual expressive motions or attempts at comedy. Ethan's mother's face remained cold and tight, but she nodded as Catherine finished and replied briefly. Ethan's father shook Catherine's hand, a formal gesture, indicating they weren't suddenly buddies, but at least they were polite. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but the first step towards being able to breathe without constantly fearing the next disaster. 6 weeks after our wedding, Catherine and I started meeting for coffee every Thursday morning, at a place halfway between our homes. The first few meetings were awkward, stiff. We were both so cautious. I'd set a list of off-limits topics, things she couldn't ask about or use as comedy fodder, and she actually adhered to them without complaint. She talked about her therapy sessions, genuinely, without faking or exaggerating, just discussing what she was learning about herself. She admitted her therapist had pointed out she'd used humor as a weapon to keep people at arm's length, that if she made them laugh or shocked them first, she wouldn't have to risk genuine connection. I listened. I didn't offer forgiveness or comfort. I just let her speak and process, without making it about myself. She asked about the wedding and I shared the details that felt comfortable. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make jokes. Our relationship will never be normal or straightforward. The damage is too severe, it goes back too far. But I'm learning that defending myself doesn't have to mean completely destroying her. I can set limits without seeking vengeance. Ethan and I are starting our lives together in our new apartment, making plans for the future, without that constant anxiety hanging over us. I still get a tremor when my phone rings and I see Catherine's name, worried she'll fall back into her old habits. But for now, having coffee once a week with clear guidelines feels possible. And that's enough. I'm finally free from waking up every day wondering if I'll be her next punchline.